This audit committee audit work session will come to order. We are going to be talking about, amendments, proposed amendments to the audit plan, the FY 2017, audit plan. These were posted on board docs. So if you can open that or look on with someone else. We also are getting a few extra copies for anyone who needs them. Okay, there should be two available. Can we have? Okay, so we have two, the red line copy and the clean copy. Okay, just a little bit of background. The Audit Committee has already looked at these proposed amendments, talked about them over 2 meetings. So these are the amendments that the Audit Committee is recommending to the board, and we will vote on them. I'm not sure when we're going to vote on them. Okay, we'll see, but sometime either this month or January. Okay, Teresa Weatherman is here. Let's maybe we should go around. I'll go ahead and introduce the Audit Committee members who are not usually with us, and we welcome them here. Ned Holland is one of the citizen members of the Audit Committee. Thank you very much for being here. And Greg Cohen down at the end. They've been serving the Audit Committee extraordinarily well, and we welcome them here tonight. Okay, Teresa, do you want to talk a little bit about the amendments? Thank you.
Can we just put the red line version up, which is the other one? That way they can follow a little easier. I'm going to go through with the markup version just so you can see what changes were made. There's 2 key categories of changes in this document. The first are changes that don't modify the intent of the originally approved document. These changes were made for clarity. They incorporate recommendations made by the Audit Committee over the course of 2 or 3 meetings. And then there is a substantive change that modifies the original approved scope, and that's in red. And I'll briefly highlight where these changes are, and then we can address any questions you have. The first change starts on page 6. If we jump to page 6, you will see in green, school activity funds audit, procurement card audits, schools, and business process turnover audits. There are several things here. This change is being made for one key clarity reason, essentially. Procurement card audits schools, if you were to read the actual original document, it says that these audits are being done in the other 2 audits. They're not actually individual audits that are being done that are being reported independently. They're being done as part of the scope within the activity fund audit, which is the first item. Part of the school audits in the summer where we're looking at all local school activity fund P-cards and their transactions. And then for turnover audits at schools, we're looking at the local cards as well as the appropriated cards. So this change is just made for clarity so that you don't expect to see specific P-card reports because they're incorporated in the other 2. And that's the only rationale or reason behind that change. On the next page, page 7, you will see another green highlight in third-party administrators claim healthcare audit. These changes were made just to help clarify some of the language. The audit will include eligibility component, not may. It will include an eligibility component. And it represents not 100% recovery, but 100% review of pharmacy claims and payments for claims. And part of the problem at this point, some of the questions that have come up on this one has to do with volume. And we've looked at several areas, and we did a little more research tonight, so if there's some questions there, we can address those. The most important change being made or proposed is to the telecommunications audit. This is a scope change. None of the changes I've mentioned so far actually impact the scope of what the board approved originally. This change does. That's why it's in red. This audit was proposed to be done by a third party, put out an RFP, have the third party come in and do some work. Additional information was obtained by the auditor, and the third party review didn't look like it was going to be as meaningful or effective based on some of the things that are already in place. Some changes that are being made by IT that are currently in place, moving to, Mary Beth, help me, is it VoIP?
Voice over IP. We're in the process of converting all of our voice analog lines to voice over IP, meaning it's going over the data network. So we don't want people to come in and take credit for reducing our voice lines when we're already in the process of moving them to data lines.
Thank you.
That's the simple version.
I didn't want to mess that up, and I knew she could do that for me. So in order to make this a more meaningful audit, we're recommending not having a third party come in and do the review, but for us to bring it in-house and look at internal controls over the telecommunication usage and expenses. This would address the risk of unnecessary expenditures due to unrequested services, et cetera. So it's taking off the third party component of this, bringing it in-house and doing it with existing staff. Those are all of the changes that are being recommended. All other areas of this document are remaining intact as originally approved.
Thank you. And I would just remind everybody, this audit plan, the board voted on last summer. So it's an annual plan. We don't usually make changes unless there's something that we really feel needs to be changed. And the audit committee thought these were important amendments. So any questions or further comments? Mr. Moon?
So how do the suggested changes for the telecommunication affect the timeline for your work and the reporting to the audit committee and to the full board?
The timeline for everything in here, not just telecommunications, has been extended. We're about 2 to 3 months behind the original plan timeline, and we'll be reporting all of this again. We've been talking about this in audit committee every month. We haven't started this. This is the next topic that will be on somebody's plate when we have staff free up. As you know, we have some vacancies we're having difficulty filling, as well as some other projects that we were pulled to do over the summer that necessitated extending the work for some of these other things. So the timeline, we're not on time with any of these projects at this point in time. We are delayed across the board.
Mrs. Strauss?
Thank you for the various modest changes. In the third-party administrators' health claims paid, what do you anticipate the scope when it says this represents a more which allows for potential for 100% review of medical, dental, and pharmacy claims and payments for claims, etc. How will the third-party group that comes in to take a look at this, they're not going to review every claim. I mean, what is the scope in order to get a sense of improved efficiency?
The intended scope as the RFP was written, based on research that had been done by the parties that were actually working on it, the group that was working on this, it is a recommended 100% claim review, but this is not going in, pulling it in, and looking at the papers. It's actually an electronic claim review. Okay. Where the data is pulled into the vendor's software program. And what they do is they map out certain components of our plan, our agreement, our administrative agreement for services that we have with our healthcare, and also our plan summary. They pull out certain components, and then they run a query against the claims that they pull in from our vendor. And it pushes out a so-called exception report of those claims that didn't meet the criteria. Okay. Those would then be further reviewed. We've looked at several RFPs that have been completed that were 100% claims. We've also looked at a couple companies that specialize in doing this work. We're working with procurement and also with benefits to determine what the actual dynamics and impact of this will be. There's been some reviews already done, some pre-implementation reviews where a current contractor that we have runs sample test claims against the setup in the system to make sure that they're coming out and being paid the way they should be paid. So that may help a proposed third-party vendor limit their scope, or maybe try to look at how that scope would be. Due to the volume of our claims, we're hoping that the vendors that bid on these proposals in the RFP is out. I think it closes early January. If this is a scope that is too large based on our size and something that cannot be managed, the responses to that will come back with, this is a proposed modification because of these particular limitations. It's quite possible they might not be able to handle 100%, depending on what their limitations are on their software package. We will have a pre-proposal meeting December 15th. Is that right, Paul? Where any vendor that is interested in providing a bid for this, and they'll bring up some of the questions then if there are any questions regarding the actual scope, and we'll have to revisit some of that.
Great, and then it also talks about eligibility, so it's been some years since we have done a huge eligibility piece, so is that will be a part of this investigation?
Eligibility will be a part of the audit. Eligibility is reviewed when dependents are added to our claims.
Right.
By HR. Their folks do that on a regular basis, but this will include part of that eligibility component where they will review, are these eligible individuals receiving the benefits?
Okay, good, because hopefully this will be a robust enough audit so that we can actually find some efficiencies. So, great, thank you.
Jeanette?
Thank you. So I wanted to, for the board's sake, to let everyone know that this telecommunications change in audit was brought to the committee, but we never did a consensus that this was our recommendation to the full board. So I think that's an important kind of thing to mention as we're discussing this. And I will bring up what I brought up at Audit Committee as well, that if the concern is a company coming in and recognizing savings of things we're already implementing, such as the voice over IP, a suggestion would be to contract that in, especially given the fact that we're so far behind on so many audits. To now bring another audit we weren't planning to be internal using OAG staff is a concern to me when there's a lot of audits we are behind on, all of them. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Just, Ms. Weatherman, thank you for clarifying. I had raised my concerns over some of the language on the third-party health claims, but for the rest of the board, what this really will do is the external vendor is likely to have an algorithm. The algorithm will be run against all of the claims that have been made and identify any sorts of inconsistencies. That's typically what happens in this type of audit. The second piece of that is really an opportunity for process improvement, especially in the area of determining which eligibility. And so this is something that I think the school system will benefit greatly by having this audit done, but it's not truly 100% review of all claims. It's by people, it's more of an algorithm type thing that will identify areas of risk and then just flag those individual areas for review.
And Ms. Corbett-Sanders, I thank you for bringing that up today, because if you hadn't mentioned it today, we wouldn't have gone back and looked further to actually be able to provide you that much detail, because I didn't have that detail before. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to go back a minute to Ms. Huff's comment because I guess I missed it. It was my understanding that this recommendation on page 7 is the recommendation of the Audit Committee. So did I miss something in one of our meetings? Can maybe other members of the Audit Committee help me out here? I thought this is what we're recommending to the board.
I knew we had talked about it, and when we were talking about it, I said I didn't feel comfortable making the recommendation without talking to the whole board, and you had said that you agreed. That was the last I remembered on it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I see what you're saying. All right. So tonight, if board members have any comments about it, then we could take that back. Audit Committee has a meeting on Wednesday night. So thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
And Ms. Hines, we should have Wednesday when we come to Audit Committee. We'd be able to give you an idea of not only what is outstanding on the audit plan, but if you look at the actual audit plan timeline, we were heavily loaded in the beginning of the year, and there was a lot of empty space in the second half of the year. So at this point in time with current staffing, we should be able to manage this. As we increase the staffing and fill our vacancies, it would be a little easier to manage it, but we'll be able to give the committee a better sense of where we are and how we're going to complete this given our current situation.
Ms. McLaughlin?
In terms of what Ms. Huff has brought up, and I appreciate that the goal was to have the board discuss it, but I have to say I still don't feel any clarity here. So what I heard Ms. Huff questioning is whether or not it makes sense to outsource this audit. And as someone who's married to a general counsel, where that's what you have to do oftentimes, is you have to, use outside counsel for various projects. So it would be helpful to just understand. I know, Ms. Weatherman, you were saying that you're comfortable thinking this can be done internally. But that would be more helpful, I think, if I understood it in the context of where we are in total with the audit plan itself. Like, in other words, if you can absorb this one, that's fine. But where are we then in the grand scope of all the audit work? Because I know there is fewer hands on deck right now. And so it's just a matter of trying to figure out what's the most efficient but also effective way to move through this audit plan through the year. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just speaking a little bit more to that, if you think, despite what Ms. Huff's reservations are, that you view it differently and why.
Sure. And I respect her reservations and I understand that. And I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I think we can manage this, and this is why. What is on the audit plan at this point in time, the asset management will be coming to the audit committee in January. Online campus will be coming either January or February, depending on how we get our meeting set up with management. IT cybersecurity is something I need to pick back up. It is partially complete. Activity fund is complete, comes to audit committee this week. Turnover audits are ad hoc. We have an hourly person working on those. The only audits that are on the plan that have not been started are substitute use and telecommunications. The carryover audit has been scheduled for an entrance conference. The goal is completion prior to spring so that the board has meaningful information in order to move forward with decisions, policy decisions that may impact carryover at the end of the year. And we'll be meeting with financial services later in the month. So with current staffing, substitute use, telecommunications, IT audit, and carryover funds are the four that we need to work on. And there's 3 of us that are doing the work currently with an hourly person. And then we're actively pursuing filling the 2 vacancies that we have in the office at this point in time. So now, knowing where we are headed to spring and that a lot of our bigger projects are kind of rolling to completion, everybody's going to need additional work. And I think we have staff that can take that on. We'll have a better idea when we sit down and speak with Susan Marks later this week, and then come to audit committee and discuss our actual progress for the year. But at this point in time, it looks like all of these will have an auditor assigned, but maybe 1, and then we have 2 vacancies that we'll be filling early winter.
So I think, unfortunately, it kind of ties 2 issues together. One is that we've got 2 vacancies, and I feel like this is the cart before the horse. For example, Mr. Horton, who recently departed. I know we're going to have this as our next audit topic, but I think it's a very serious concern for this board that we have an auditor general position that we need to fill. And depending on who that person is hired, they may decide that the position that Mr. Horton filled, is that really the structure we want? So are you telling me we're planning to fill that position?
We have an auditor 2 vacancy. We have an auditor 1, auditor 2 vacancy, as well as the audit manager. We are moving forward with the auditor 1 and 2. We are leaving the audit manager position vacant until such time the AG comes on board to determine what the appropriate structure and management organizational structure of the office is.
And so these auditor 1 and auditor 2 positions, we're hiring them based on the fact that they can do performance and programmatic, not just internal control audits?
Yes, ma'am, because that's the kind of audits that we do typically anyway. We do one financial audit a year, which is the summer audit. All our other audits are performance audits.
Okay. And then the only other thing I would say is I appreciate the helpful context you provided. In looking at this and the timing, one reason that I would see that we would want to consider outside audit support is like the substitute use. When I was looking at the timeline on that one, I think it was saying something like June or July. It says for the board in July. It says it'll come to the audit committee in June and to the board in July. In my mind, substitute use, I mean, that is an enormous amount of money, $25 million. That to me is one that should be almost a priority even over telecommunications, because telecommunications is $8 million and who knows what we would yield from it. Substitute use, if we have some substantive recommendations coming before the board, this could actually help us with our budget. So I kind of don't understand why that isn't considered one of the things we would elevate and have ready much sooner than June or July.
These timelines were the proposed timelines when the plan was proposed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a relevant discussion for the audit committee, is what the priorities are at this time. And that's something I think we should discuss when we talk about our status of audits on Wednesday. If that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be really good to consider, because I appreciate where it's talking about the carryover fund and balance and the goal of trying to get information to the board in time for May when we're finalizing the budget. Regrettably, probably when this was first approved, we didn't realize the financial difficulties we're going to find ourselves in with our budget. So I think it just might be one of those things where it might actually be more relevant and maybe not in keeping with our normal practice, but we might want to consider that.
Sure.
And I'll see you at the audit committee.
Okay, right. We'll take that back to the audit committee. Ms. Karen?
I was just going to suggest, we actually have 4 out of 8 positions in the audit shop at this point to be filled. And I would actually suggest that rather than belaboring whether or not we do this tonight, that we actually send it back to the audit committee, that we've already talked about the need for a telecommunications audit, but we're not really, given some of the ambiguity, let's just put that in a parking lot, and because we're not voting on this amendment tonight, am I correct?
No, we're not voting on it tonight, but I do think, our next regular board meeting is this Thursday. So we don't meet again until January. So I think it does, just for the sake of, well, you tell me, Ms. Weatherman, given the changes that we're making in the audit plan, is there a time by which the board really should vote on these things in order to not lose time on them?
The only thing that would impact the work we do is the approval of Telecom. If we put the Telecom audit on the side and put some of the other audits as a higher priority, then the approval date's not going to impact us being able to continue work. The change in that scope is what needs approval. The other elements in here are more for clarity, so they're not going to have an impact on our work product.
Okay, it won't hurt the health claims
No, ma'am.
meeting? Okay, go ahead.
So what I would suggest is you probably can get clarity on Wednesday, and if necessary, have further discussion after that. But at this point, I don't think we have to make a decision on this right now.
Okay, so probably what I want tonight then, before we finish talking about this, is what exactly we're bringing back to the audit committee to discuss, what seems like we have some settlement on and what we need to bring back. Tom, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question on these changes to the telecommunications. And maybe, Teresa, you can clarify this, or maybe somebody on the audit committee. What was the intent? What was the reasons for having the third-party audit of telecommunications when it was discussed in the proposal that we originally looked at? What was the? Because it does seem very different. I mean, what was the logic in the discussion that was had to to go that route?
I'm not sure. Ned knows.
First, I need to tell you that I was in the telecommunications business, and I'm not anymore. I haven't been for 8 years. I suggested this as an approach. Both originally, we discussed it as a possible contingent fee audit. I'm a believer in contingent fee audits. I'm also responsible for the healthcare audit that we're doing. Contingent fee audits, when they can be done effectively, both save money and produce better results, in my view. In this case, I'm aware, and I've been aware when I worked at the federal government, that there's an awful lot of telecommunications systems that are underutilized or completely unused. And so I suggested that we should look at these systems at FCPS and with the potential to save money. Now, what I didn't know at the time was that Mary Beth was already working on VoIP. Again, as a former telecom executive, I would tell you the telecom people hate VoIP. Where you stand depends on where you sit. I now think it's a good idea. I didn't used to. And she's working on it, and there's no sense duplicating work she's already doing, which is why I believe that the change that we've made to the scope is a good idea. Now, the question of whether the staff can do it internally or not is entirely different. I understand the conversation, and I'd kind of leave some of that to later. But it was originally because there's money to be saved there, and then we're changing it because Mary Beth is already doing a great deal of the work, and there's no point duplicating it or giving some outside person credit for having saved money that we're going to save anyway.
So in the deleted text here, is it implied, is the VoIP, is that implied, that change in there? Because I don't see that in the deleted text, the transition to VoIP. Okay, so that would have been something that the auditor, outside auditor, would have looked at and suggested. You're saying, and we're already on that.
I think probably so, yes, sir. And the audit committee members didn't realize what Mary Beth was doing. She's ahead of it. She should be. She ought to be congratulated for that. And once we learned about it, it was no sense duplicating.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess I appreciate that point, but wouldn't an outside third party, couldn't you just carve out that piece of it and say, hey, we're already on this part of it?
I said that at the last meeting. We could do that,
okay,
but if we have the staff to do it internally, it likely would be more efficient.
Okay. I mean, I guess one thing I'm noticing, and you've mentioned it already, is that what was contemplated was a contingent fee structure, which I'm also a fan of contingent fees, because essentially if they don't produce, they don't get paid. And so that approach does have some appeal to me. So
I think a big part of a potential contingent fee for an outside auditor is lost when we do the VoIP internally. So the desirability from a vendor's point of view is substantially diminished, and we may well get some pushback, some difficulty in placing a contingent fee contract without that possibility.
One of the other suggestions was that we may want to come back to this in a couple of years when the total voice over IP project is complete. Then you may want to then you could potentially do this, but we don't recommend doing it right now while we're in the middle of this transition. So that's one of the things that was suggested, that maybe we come back in a couple of years as a future audit plan, and then potentially have an outside vendor come in and take a look at it once we've got it, where we want it to be.
Well, with that input, should we even have this in the audit plan at all? And are we tasking unnecessarily the auditor's office staff in a year when they've got a lot of spots to fill?
I think that's a fair question, and we've not fully addressed it. It seems to me that probably needs to be addressed by the audit committee.
Okay.
I can't speak for the chair of the audit committee. Pardon me, Pat.
No, that's all right. I mean, I'm kind of taking notes on what we'll bring back to the audit committee Wednesday on that change.
Okay.
So either in-house, out-of-house, or maybe think about putting it off for a year or two.
Okay, this is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, well, that's helpful for us as well. So I think that's what we're taking back, that we don't have much discussion about other parts of the audit plan amendment except for that one. And we have a couple questions to take back to audit committee. Right. Yes, Megan.
So I think what I heard Ms. Weatherman saying earlier is that much of this was just a rewording to make it more accurate language. And in that regard, I don't have any problem with what I've seen. I think it's fine if that helps move that piece along. And then I think it's just a matter of the telecommunications, whether it stays on or not. And then if there's any other dates we want to look at for the current audits or any more time sensitive that maybe we would put into a higher priority category.
Right, I think that's right. That's another takeaway, is to take a look at our calendar to see if we want to change. All right, thank you all. The next thing on our agenda is still audit. And another thing that the Audit Committee will talk about on Wednesday, we'll begin to discuss the process of hiring the new Auditor General. And so we thought, yes, actually, is Chase still here? Do you want to come join us up, if you don't mind? We may have questions for you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Thanks a lot. So some of the things that we will start discussing on Wednesday are, you know, the timeline. We'll start talking about the profile of an auditor and the job description. And we will also be talking about who will help us to conduct the search. And we thought that we would go ahead and put some of those questions to the board tonight and see if we can get any thoughts, consensus, questions, things you think the Audit Committee ought to be thinking about to bring back to the board. So maybe I'll start with that last one, which is who do we think should help us conduct the search? And it seems like the options are either an outside headhunter or search firm, or to have it done in-house by HR. So Chase, that's why I know you're just getting settled there, but that's why I asked Chase to be here, because Sandy and I already had a conversation with Chase about this, about what it would look like if HR helped us with the search for a new Auditor General. So if you want to walk through what your shop would do for us.
Sure. Good evening. Happy to be with you this evening and to answer any questions you might have. As Pat said, we have had a little bit of conversation on what a process would look like. We do a number of searches, as you all know, at all levels of the division. And so as you look at the Auditor General search, it would be one that we would run like most of our administrator searches throughout the division, where we would advertise the position at a variety of locations that are relevant to the position. And so looking at some of our channels that are different than we normally advertise for school administrators, as it's a different type of position. We've identified about 7 or 8 that in the area that we think would be able to generate a nice pool of candidates for this position beyond where we would typically advertise. It's really a 3-step process after we advertise. In terms of, we would review the resumes and narrow those down to a group of candidates to provide as a first round interview pool. That number is hard to predict. It really is at the pleasure somewhat of the supervisor or the supervising body, this being the board, about how many we want to interview in that first round. Typically 5, 7, any more than that, it gets a little more complicated. And then from that, narrow that field down to anywhere from 1 to, I'd say on the outside, 3 that the board might want to bring it back for a final interview. And so we really would look at those 3 phases: an on-paper review, and then a first round interview, and then also a final interview. As you look at our timeline, the pieces that really dictate how that timeline looks is how long we want to leave the advertising window open, and then the quality of resumes and candidates that are generated through that search process. By our estimate, once we would close the advertising window, we can get the process moved from beginning to end, and we think less than 4 weeks. So really, it's something that if we advertised right at the beginning of January, we believe that if all goes well and we get the candidates that we want and get the screening completed, we could bring, or the board could potentially come with a recommendation at their February 23rd board meeting.
Okay, thank you. So that's if we did it in-house. That's probably a little bit, would you say that's ambitious?
It is.
Okay.
It is. But, I understand that where in some conversations with Pat Sandy, that the board does want to move forward with this. Obviously, that's looking at if the board's ready to advertising January 11th, we start our advertising on Wednesdays, leaving it open for a 2-week period. And so that would be casting the net first for that first 2 weeks, and then the candidate pool being at a level the board would like coming back at that 2 weeks. Of course, the time frame after we close the window, if we're happy with the pool after that, that's pretty much set where we need it to be based on where we think we can move through those different phases as long as schedules line up. So it really is pretty much dictated by how long we need to leave the pool open. So yes, it's ambitious. That's thinking that we're going to have those candidates first time out, which is what we want, but we know that doesn't always happen. And there are some other avenues, of course, if the board would like to go with a headhunting agency or someone outside of HR.
Right. So then, just to get a little bit of a window, if we could say end of February is ambitious. When you look at your experience of hiring LT, at that level, which is kind of what we're looking at, someone with that resume, what is more of an average? I mean, would you say the average is longer than that?
Yes, because we'd like to leave the position open for probably about a month.
Okay, so instead of
instead of that 2 weeks, but just looking again, trying to based on some of those previous conversations. But no, ideally we'd want to leave it open for 4 weeks.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I appreciate that you're trying to be responsive to what you've heard is our concern to get this done quickly, right? Okay, so end of February might be ambitious, another 2 to 4 weeks after that.
And the other thing that we can do really is we set that, if the board says, okay, we want to move quickly, we don't want to box ourselves in, we can use a strategy where we leave the position open until filled. And so it's almost on a rolling basis. And so the board begins to look at resumes, or the screening committee that the board articulates begins to look at resumes at a certain date. And so it could be sooner, it could be later. It's really one of those things where it's predicated on what the quality of the resumes and applicants is coming back to the division.
Okay, one more question for you. Sure. If we went with an outside headhunter or search firm, should we anticipate that they would do all of that, or would they just do the initial search part and then you help us with the interviews?
That's really up to the board's pleasure in terms of how they want to use a search firm. I think that, based on my experience in looking at different contracts, they offer a variety of services. We've contracted with organizations in the past that have helped us on the front end and then turned it over to us. As the board has their own experiences, they know that there can be different levels of involvement from the outside.
Okay, thank you. That's good. So we have some flexibility. I appreciate it. Again, this is our first conversation, so we're just kind of feeling the waters. Ms. McLaughlin?
Thank you. And Chase, I appreciate that you provide some additional context, because I was making notes as you were talking. And one of the first things I wanted to emphasize to my colleagues is I think without question it needs to be open until filled. I think that's something that the system has done. And because this is such a highly specific position, we would not want to put a closing date on there, because we could end up getting a resume that comes in and it's really a stellar candidate. So in terms of how things were outlined so far in your remarks and Ms. Hines, I right now would not have any reservations having this done internally, like an LT level position. And I won't muddy the waters by saying that this is going to need to be an LT position, because we'll have that conversation next. But I do want to say that in terms of if HR were to kind of oversee this process, there are some key pieces for my colleagues that I would like you to consider. Number one, I think that the Audit Committee should be reviewing each and every resume. I think it's really important. We have 2 subject matter experts that are part of the Audit Committee, and we are going to need to rely heavily on their expertise in looking at that. When the board engaged in this hiring process before, we didn't have our citizen appointees to the Audit Committee, and I had actually suggested we needed someone with audit expertise to help the board. So I'm feeling very good about their role in that. And what we did find in our first experience going through this is, because it's highly specific, it's very unusual to have school systems that have this position, we weren't overrun with resumes. I mean, it was very limited, so I don't think it will be too taxing for the Audit Committee to look at those. Second thing is that, as has been done in Arlington, it'd be one thing to have HR kind of help us manage the process, but I think the audit committee needs to certainly help lead the board's effort on this. And I think it's going to be essential that not only the audit committee members, including the citizens, participate in reviewing the resumes, but they also are part of the interview panel. We do that for our principal hires, where we have our citizens participating in it. It's a simple confidentiality agreement that we could have them sign, but I think it's absolutely critical that when we talk about who's going to be part of that next stage, which is interviewing candidates, I also advocate for their participation. So what I'm saying here is, first step is going to be once the resumes are collected, and as they roll in, they're reviewed by the entire audit committee. And then as the audit committee sees the timing of the resumes, then you decide when to, bring them to the board to start setting up, the interview timeline. And then the open till filled. I don't want us to get too caught up on, Dr. Ramey, you were very kind in hearing some board members being eager to fill this, but I think this is also going to be part of the audit larger discussion, which is we have to have the job description with great clarity first, and that is something the audit committee is looking at and the full board needs to look at. And as I hope some other people will chime in this evening, we are heading into the holidays. And so good people who are happy in their jobs aren't job hunting during the holiday season. They're just not. So I would just say, Ms. Hines, that I'm not so much concerned about us setting exactly when this happens in January. I think it's more important that we have a good process in place. I do like the LT model, and I think we'll be in good hands, but we have got to, as a board, take advantage of our citizen appointees to the maximum level.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have other board members. Chase, could I ask you the question about open until filled or closed after 4 weeks? What difference does that make, do you think?
Well, from a logistical standpoint, it doesn't require us to go back and repost a position after we close or send notice to people that have already applied that we're reopening the position. That can send the wrong message to individuals that submit their applications early on. You might get a stellar applicant in the first week, but you're looking to have a rich collection to choose from, and you don't want to send the wrong message to those people that are very eager on the front end by closing it and then reopening it. They might not consider themselves strong candidates anymore, and it's just not accurate. And so our experience is that, especially with leadership positions or highly skilled positions, leaving it open until filled is a better approach, and it's something candidates are used to in these type of roles. They understand the difference in the positions.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Yes, I echo much of what my colleague, Ms. McLaughlin, has said, but I would actually just kind of put this in perspective. I'm a little worried that we're putting the cart before the horse. We really need to have the conversation about what is the profile that we're trying to fill. What exactly is the role? How is that role defined in the audit charter? And based on the role and responsibilities that are defined, then, and I would support it being at a leadership level, because that is something that the previous position was on the unified scale. And when you're talking about having peer-to-peer conversations, then having that role on the leadership level is going to be important. I would also suggest that before we actually post that job description or the advertisement, that we have it in writing what our profile of the job position is going to be, our profile of the candidate. And then in the process of identifying the candidate, it's going to be very important to do some real due diligence on that candidate to ensure that, similar to what we're doing on our superintendent search, that we have the due diligence that includes not only the social media footprint, but any sort of other areas that might be concerned for us. So similar to Ms. McLaughlin, I don't think we have to have this posted on January 11th as much as we have to have the right posting. And so I would welcome that the audit committee spend either, and we can meet more than just once a month to get those pieces in place.
We can, and we might have to. Thank you. Ms. Strauss, followed by Ms. Derenak Kofax.
First, I would welcome the assistance of our HR department and Dr. Ramey. I think that you all would be a tremendous add to our adventure that lies ahead. I think posting open until filled, and I would welcome the opportunity for our citizens on the audit committee to also be involved in this. And I know that there's more work to be done on the profile and all the rest of it. One piece that I would certainly welcome is to add to the profile of a licensed CPA, and because there are certain professional requirements, whether or not one is still active in that field, but if you are a licensed CPA, there's simply professional integrity that is involved in certain disciplines that I think that we would benefit from. So I think Dr. Ramey and his staff would be very helpful in our effort to try to find somebody good. Thanks.
Thank you. Tammy?
I would concur with what my colleagues have said. I think we should begin with Dr. Ramey and your staff working to fulfill this position. I would like to, Ms. Strauss kind of took one piece of it, but I want to look at the entire job description of the Auditor General, as well as the reporting structure as outlined, because I think somewhere along the line, some of that had changed from original where it was supposed to report to the full board, the chair, however, I think we need to look at that and discuss that again and make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. On Wednesday, the audit committee will begin to look at the profile or job description, and at the same time take a look at some proposed changes to the regulation. 1420, I believe it is, right? I get them all mixed up. And because it is important to have that nailed down before we create the job description, and we need the job description before we start the search. So it's a little bit of a lot of stuff all at once. Mr. Moon?
I hope that audit committee has a meeting coming up in a couple of days. You have a lot on your plate. That I would like to see a proposal that will touch upon all the issues that have been raised by the other board members at this table tonight, including whether to include the community members to screen the application or even participate on the panel interview, etc. Hopefully our division council also look at the policy and state statutes and what's permissible and what's not permissible, and give us a clear guidance and what can be done on that one. And also, as a board member who had done a superintendent search and also went through AG search before, and how much of efforts we had to put in to go through, how long it took to get to the final destination. One thing that I'm concerned is that as we know, looking at our calendar, what has to take place during the month of March and April for our superintendent search, if this is going to happen at the same time, what that would mean to the lives of all of us, or at least to some of us. I'm sure the audit committee will consider all those in coming up with some proposal for us to consider. Our interim, my understanding is interim AG is working on a part-time basis at this point in time. So I do not want to leave that position in their way too long. We have to follow the right process to get a good AG, but at the same time, I don't want to keep the position as is that long. We need to have someone. I know it's a tough task, but regrettably, we have this huge task of finding a next superintendent as our main task for the next probably almost 6 months.
Thank you. When it rains, it pours, right? So thank you. I think that's what the audit committee will try to do, is come back with a proposal for the board to look at, which will include the profile or job description and the timeline. And I wanted to ask also, Megan, you talked about who should be, and I actually have asked Mr. Foster our counsel about, the role, and he and I have not talked yet, but I am also of the mind that it would be good to have our citizen members' expertise looking at the resumes and interviewing the candidates. So as long as but you're right, we have to check with counsel. Ms. McLaughlin?
I just have a quick clarifying question. I mean, Dr. Ramey can certainly answer at least what we do right now. I mean, if we have parents and citizens who interview our principals, how is that any different?
That's what I was going to add, is that you're exactly right, that we have parents right now that sit on our panels for principals. And so we welcome community involvement in these processes to a certain level. And so having the citizen members of the audit committee would not be a problem. We would want to make sure that we outline the process that we're going to use and then we follow that. But having them involved at certain levels would not be an issue at all.
Okay, thank you. And the other question that came to my mind as we were talking was, who will be on the committee? Because Ms. McLaughlin, you were talking about the role of the audit committee and obviously, doing all of this. But then, as I recall, last time we also had a committee, not of the whole. The committee of the whole will do the superintendent search for sure. But I remember with the AG, it was not a committee of the whole. There were 8 or 9 of us who did that. And is that something people are still comfortable with?
I think we took everyone who wanted to do it participate. So we didn't set a number, maximum number. We didn't discriminate against anyone. They said whoever wanted to participate, come and participate. So, and that was the number.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I feel like we need a quorum, though. Don't you think we need a quorum of board members on that, or not?
I think not. Whatever is being composed as a search committee, majority of that will be the quorum of the search. It doesn't have to be the majority of 12 of us,
Okay.
or if you include 12, 2 community members, majority of 14 of us.
Okay, all
That
right.
was my understanding.
Okay, thank you. This may be more nitty-gritty than we.
Because
need
that
right
does
now.
not make a final decision. Final decision will be by the board.
By the board.
Well, and
Chase?
just,
Was Mr. Moon's final statement that the final decision would be of the entire board. The only thing I would add is that as the board considers who's going to serve at these different levels, we do look at it in terms of levels. And so, but everyone needs to be, whoever's going to be present at one level needs to be present for the entire level. So if you're going to be part of the screening committee, you have to screen all the resumes. If you're going to be on the first interview panel,
Yeah.
you have to sit on all those interviews, and then again with the final. But that doesn't mean you have to be in all 3 stages. And so you could participate in one stage and not the other 2 to what the board wants as they want to look at those duties.
And that's exactly what happened at the last process.
Yes, I do recall that. Megan?
yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I just meant that I wanted to have the audit committee see all the resumes. If it turns out that we make it the search committee that includes our citizens, and that's who's going to review all the resumes. But I just think because it's not going to be a large volume, I think we benefit from those doing the search to see all the resumes for context.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so, yes, Tom?
And maybe I'm just trying to fit all the different pieces of this together. But so is the concept that we would be developing the job description, finalizing it, looking at the applicable policy and regulations, and finalizing those, and beginning the process of searching? Is that sort of all happening in an overlap? Like once we had a job description, we would start the search even if we hadn't finalized the policy changes and regulations?
My feeling from what I'm hearing from board members and audit committee members is that what we kind of need to do it one thing at a time.
Okay.
So, in sequence, right? I mean, I think the audit committee will on Wednesday have both things in front of them, the regulation, or what we call the charter, and the job description. But I think it's fair to say that we need to probably finish our thinking on the charter before we finish the job description. So I'm not sure exactly. The audit committee will work on have some thoughts about that on Wednesday. Ned, did you want to add something?
Well, I just feel compelled to say, okay. I've heard a lot of work for Greg and me to do, and I'm prepared to do that. I quite agree that he and I have some experiences that may be useful. You may not want to know all the times I've hired auditor generals, but or what I had to do after I hired them. But I believe we can do this. I think doing the policies and the job description simultaneously is important. I will tell you that I am not an advocate of job descriptions. In fact, I'm an advocate against job descriptions. I've been doing this for almost 50 years, and I used to advise clients not to have job descriptions. I don't think we can do that here. I think this is a public body, and you have to have a job description. But I would tell you that a majority of the Fortune 100 companies in this country don't have job descriptions at all, and I did away with them at the last two big companies I worked at. So I don't want to get hung up on those things, but we need to do it, and we need to do it promptly. And for what it's worth, I entirely agree with the board members who've spoken. Chase's shop can handle this. When I've had Chase's job, or I've supervised Chase's job for the last 20 years, and I used to evaluate my folks in the extent to which we did not use outside search firms. That's not to say I haven't used them. I certainly have. I'm not pure on this. But I think the way you've outlined to do it will work, and I will commit whatever time I have, and whatever time is needed to do what the chair wants.
Thank you.
So then, as chair of the audit committee, will there be sort of something that other board members can look at to say, yeah, I want to participate in this piece of it or in that piece?
Yes, and I think that's what Mr. Moon was asking for, is a proposal, a plan, right? And then, there will be different stages, and we'll get it all lined up and give everybody a chance to participate where you want to. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Megan?
Yes, I did want to kind of circle back with Dr. Amy on the advertising in the position. As been noted tonight, it is a highly specific skill set. And I am aware that I guess there's an association of governing auditors or government auditors here in the region. And so it would be my desire that at least we check in with them and get some guidance on where they recommend the very best places to advertise a vacancy like this, because it's really not a more traditional, education position. And so we just I'd like to make sure we kind of touched the areas that don't necessarily look at just K-12, employment options.
They are on our list. We've already started that outreach to some of the organizations in preparation for tonight. I just didn't want to show up and say, "Oh, I think we can do this." And so we have started to look at some of those places, and the organization you mentioned is on our list, with a number of others, both local, state, and regional, for us to connect with on this.
Greg?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Megan said. I think if there were so few applicants last time, I don't know if there's a national search planned, or I just think you should consider all options. A couple other things. I think job description to me is too narrow. I'm not all the way where Ned is, but based on my year or so on this committee, audit committee, I don't think there's alignment between management and all of the board even on what you guys want the role of the audit function, much less the auditor general would be. So we as an audit committee can discuss, but I don't think it should be, this is what it's going to be. I think the board needs to be involved, whether it's a committee of the whole or otherwise. So happy to be involved, but I think that's important.
Thank you. Dahlia?
Yeah, I just want to second that in a way. I was reading over the charter, and it is pretty prescriptive, or it gives an idea of what the function of the Auditor General will be. So if that is not where we are, I think that's definitely the first step we need to make before we look at any more descriptive language.
Yes, thank you. And that, yeah, Mr. Moon?
I understand that board members may disagree with this, but I think it may be prudent for us to ask a division counselor to look at, especially this is I think Appendix N to the our governance manual. It puts some restriction on the audit committee members. Just want to make sure that we are doing everything accordance with our governance manual and the policies and statutes, etc. Because that has put some restriction on what they can do, what they cannot. Just make sure.
Okay, thank you. So Chase, you've taken on another huge task. Thank you. So I think yeah, if you wouldn't mind going back. It sounds to me like the consensus is that we'd be very happy to have you help us out with this, so.
Great, happy to do it. And to Mr. Wilson's point, and again, I know that I gave you an expedited timeline, but it's my job to put my best foot forward and try to serve the managers and clients that we serve in HR, which includes the board. And so that's why you heard that timeline from me. But again, to Mr. Wilson's point, I wouldn't recommend going out for the search until those pieces were finalized. I mean, that's actually the first step, on my outline is finalize job description and the plan, because it's not fair to the folks that we're trying to recruit unless we have that information out there ahead of time. And so we'll work with you on that, do what we can to support at each step. So thank you.
Yes, Greg.
One last minor, maybe administrative point, but I see on our audit committee meeting Wednesday, it says we're going to spend an hour on policies and regulations, but those materials are not attached.
Yes,
So I'm assuming we're not going to talk about those?
No, we are. Unfortunately, they are coming tomorrow, and I'm sorry for the short turnaround for
Not
committee
for me, but
members.
for the public.
I know, it's not usually how we like to do things, but they were just not ready until tomorrow. So
Okay.
apologies. If the audit committee doesn't feel like we can make enough progress on them, we'll, bump it over to the next meeting.
And then similarly, we've been talking about potentially modifying the audit charter. I think similarly, if the governance manual, if Appendix N, where it outlines that citizen members can't participate in closed meetings of the board, that's actually what it says. There could be an exclusion that says, with the exception of, discussions for the hiring, not firing, or any other administrative things to do with personnel. But if that's what the board decides to do, I think that could be considered. It's not written in stone.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. We started 20 minutes late, so we're ending in exactly an hour. Thank you all very much. We have another work session coming up in just a couple minutes, right?
Yeah, so we'll take a 2-minute break and then we will be talking PEC things.